Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Brooklyn Book Festival. We're so thrilled to be presenting this program tonight together with the 370J Project, NYU's 370J Project. It's been a series that we started last fall, has continued through the spring, and is part of our Brooklyn Book Festival bookend events tonight. I'm Liz Koch. I'm the co-producer of the festival together with Carolyn Greer. We've had a full week of bookend events up until now, taking place all over the city and also virtually, of course. And this weekend is our big culminating time. We have a Children's Day, all outdoors tomorrow in downtown Brooklyn, and then our festival day on Sunday, which starts at 10 a.m. in the morning and goes until 11 o'clock at night. It's both in person and virtual. I want to bring everybody's attention to the button below the panel. It is the most important button, the buy book button. Show the love is what we like to say. That's the best way to show your love to the authors. Click on that button. Also, the festival is celebrating its Sweet 16 this year, so we are encouraging everybody to support us during our Sweet 16 year. I'm going to hand over the panel now to Lincoln, who's going to moderate for us this evening, and everybody sit back and enjoy. Thank you.
Yeah, hello, I'm Lincoln Michel, and pleased to welcome you all to the 2021 Brooklyn Book Festival for a conversation with Catherynne Valente and Benjamin Percy. Before we begin, I'm supposed to remind you that you can buy books from all three of us actually in the button below. But to start off, we have Benjamin Percy has a new novel, The Ninth Metal. Catherynne Valente has a new novel, The Past is Red. And I think they're both going to read for us for a couple minutes before we dive into a conversation. And Catherynne, do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. Like super quick idea of what this book is. The climate dystopia has arrived, the seas have risen, there's virtually no land left beyond the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, which has much been built up by the inundation of the cities and the activities of sorters through the generations. So we're several generations removed from anybody living on solid land. And this is, this young woman is named Tetley. And she's done a very bad thing, and she is trying to get away from people who have been punishing her for it for some time. Winditch is the opposite direction from the Matchstick Forest and Flint Wheel Hill, and all the places I went on my way to find my name when I was a child. Away from the leeward edge of Garbagetown, away from the sea. I picked through the deflated soccer balls and broken lacrosse sticks and ghostly hanging nets of Sportington Gap, the cairns of ice skates, black pucks, tennis rackets, billiard balls like jawbreaker candies, the baffling novelty devices with "as seen on TV" stamped on their handles and rusting free weights that once kept some drowned fuckwit thin and strong in the face of their constant fucking smorgasbord of a life. Dawn was on the move by the time I scrambled down a steep cliff face of burned out Jumbotron scoreboards. Home of the Tigers. Go Gators. Yokohama Bay Stars. Fly Emirates. I hung down by my fingertips and dropped the last few feet onto a patch of wet, moldy gym mats. Winditch is almost a cave. It goes on under the gap for ages, holding it all up, thankless forever. A little thin rain started to fall as I slipped away under the golf club stalactites and into my cave of wonders. I took off my gas mask and breathed free. I'd be safe here for a while. Sunlight poured through the mouth of the scoreboard cave, Winditch lit up all over gold and silver, but mostly gold. Gold everywhere. Mr. Aladdin, eat your heart out. I walked through heaps and mounds and pillars of treasure, running my hands over it, stopping to stare. My old friends. Trophies, millions and thousands of them, 1,000 million victories. Cups, stars, orbs, numbers, little brass girls and brass boys in flapping brass togas, dancing or swimming or flying or standing proud on plastic red and white and blue and green columns. Amazing. So amazing. All of it. Always. Oh, secret molten golden heart of Garbagetown, hide me forever. I used to spend hours reading the plaques on the trophies, feeling the engraved names with my fingertips, sounding them out, imagining all those joyful fuckwits holding them tight to their chests. Gregory Ambrose, spelling bee participant. Kai-Hong Chen, most improved effort. Andrei Barenkov, better luck next time. Samantha Belfort, tried hardest. Lucy Price Kowalski, if you had fun, you won. Newport Volleyball Tournament 2029, sponsored by Al's Clam Shack. Aiden Kleinhauser, most at bats. Isabella Jorgensen, 8th runner-up, Miss Daffodil Pageant, Junior Division. Terrence Hardy, best smile. Lucy and Samantha and Kai-Hong were all well and good, but I had a favorite. I found it after my father ran off wherever fathers go when they don't want you anymore. Dadbury, father's side. I couldn't relax and stretch out in my new digs till I found it. I hadn't come to Winditch in years, but it would still be here, right where I left it. St. Oscar would do that for me. He always liked me special. Further in, farther up, yes, I pulled it down off the pile, a gold vase full of gold roses. Rotted red ribbons swarming with fungus still clung to the handles for dear life. A black red, Gretchen Barnes, world's best wife. What a girl Gretchen Barnes must have been to earn her title out of all the fuckwit billions. I didn't even know that was something you could be the best at. I was in awe of her. The whole world must have known her name, but not like the whole world knew mine. I sat down on the damp floor of that golden cave while the dawn piled in with a gas mask in one hand and Gretchen Barnes in the other, surrounded by all those fuckwit triumphs. I know they were the worst kind of death-guzzling monsters, sick and swollen as blood blisters, stupid, hungry, toothful voids in the shapes of people. But they must have loved each other so fucking much. Imagine being so alive and conscious of the importance of every single second of constantly winnowing life, every single simplest action and choice and effort, an onrushing death that you would carefully mark out, little Lucy having fun, and crown her like she was the queen of time. Imagine having so much energy to spare after finding food and shelter and clothing and some tiny goddamn scrap of company that you figured you'd make a beautiful silver cup, not because some kid did the best job, but just because she tried the hardest. I try the hardest all the time, and everyone's just permanently fucking mad at me. Imagine having that much left over that you give one single ghostly shit about the 8th best daffodil. Down there in the dark under the mountain, my hair still sticky with blood, red scars up one leg and down the other. I just couldn't fathom that much love. Those kinds of resources. I don't care about central heat or air or Tupperware or the best of Saturday Night Live DVD box set or pistachio ice cream or even penicillin. I have literally all the Air Jordans I could possibly ask for over there in Shoeshire. The only thing I want back from the fuckwit world is this thing that has its grave in Winditch under the dead, burnt out home of the Tigers Jumbotron. I want to have that much left over.
Thunderous applause.
It's always so awkward when there's not a real audience.
Well done.
And scene.
That was great.
Cool, my turn?
Yep.
All right. I'm going to read from the prologue of The Ninth Metal. Thanks for everybody, by the way, for hanging out on a Friday night. It begins with a comet. Decades ago, an infrared telescope captured the thermal emissions streaking through the solar system. Eventually, it was determined to be 300.2 kilometers wide and orbiting the sun in an elongated ellipse that would bring it within 500,000 miles of Earth. The moon, by comparison, is 238,900 miles away. This would be, scientists said, a beautiful light show that everyone should enjoy all the more, knowing that we'd narrowly escaped planetary annihilation. The official name of the comet was P/2011 C9, but most people called it Cain, the surname of the astronomer who discovered it. 20 years later, it burned into view and made its close pass by Earth. People took off work. They gathered at soccer fields and in parking lots, on rooftops and along sidewalks, setting up lawn chairs and picnic blankets and grills and coolers as though readying for a fireworks display. Everyone suddenly owned a telescope. Vendors sold comet t-shirts and hats and keychains and plush stuffed toys. Surfers stacked up on beaches waiting for the big waves they believed would come from the gravitational flux. At least 2 cults killed themselves off, announcing this was the end of the world and the comet a gateway to the vault of heaven. Professors and scientists and religious leaders became regular guests on cable news shows where they talked about how comets had long been associated with meteorological and human disasters, tsunamis, earthquakes, droughts. In 44 BC, when Caesar was assassinated, his soul was said to depart the earth and join the comet flaming overhead. In AD 79, a comet's arrival aligned with the eruption of Vesuvius. In AD 684, when Halley's comet passed by, the Black Death broke out, and in 1066, when it made another appearance, William the Conqueror won the Battle of Hastings. Celestial judgment and providence, or an instrument of the devil, as Pope Calixtus III called it. Heaven knows what awaits us, one professor said. It's a reminder of our irrelevant smallness and accidental existence in the universe, a glimpse of something violently outside the bounds of human existence, as close as you can come to seeing God. Local news reporters interviewed people on the streets. I don't know, it's just kind of cool, one man said. Special, once in a lifetime sort of deal. You want to be able to say, I was there. It's almost like we were living in this 2-dimensional life or whatever, and now there's this sense of it being 3-dimensional, if you know what I mean. Cain looked like a roughly drawn eye, some said, or a glowing animal track, or a slash mark in the fabric of space, a wandering star. For a few days, the comet made night uncertain, hued with a swampy green light, and by day the sky appeared twinned with suns. And then, gradually, the comet trailed farther and farther away, and people forgot all about it. Until 1 year passed. The planet finished its orbit of the sun and spun into the debris field left by the comet, the residue of Cain's passage. This June, the sky would fall. That's what the newscaster said. The meteor shower was not as long-lasting as August Perseids, but for several nights, the sky flared and streaked and wheeled, the constellations seeming to rearrange themselves with ever-shifting tracks of light. At first hundreds, and then thousands, and then hundreds of thousands, and finally an uncountable storm of meteors. The ground shook, windows shattered, grids of electricity went dark, satellites shredded, radio signals scrambled, dogs howled, and people screamed their prayers. Many of the meteors dissolved in the atmosphere, but many struck the earth, sizzling into the ocean, splintering roofs, searing through ice, punching craters into fields and forests and mountainsides like the seeds of the night. It was then that everything changed. Thanks.
Great. Thank you both so much. So this panel here is called Fighting for the World, and both of your books deal with environmental catastrophes and capitalism and how we deal with those. And I think obviously climate change is pretty inescapable these days. If you turn on the news, there's some new massive wildfire or flooding. But maybe I thought we could start off by having you both talk about your inspiration for these novels, and maybe also whether, is all science fiction climate fiction now? And I'll toss it to Catherynne first.
Well, it's such an odd story of how this came to be. I was asked by my editor, Jonathan Strawn, several years ago, January 2016, I think, to write a short story for an anthology called Drowned Worlds, which was explicitly a sea levels rising climate change anthology. And I was really struck by one of the lines in the précis of the anthology pitch, which was, what sort of stories will we be telling after the final catastrophe has happened? And my instant response was, well, the same kind of stories we're telling now, because we literally never ever change, which is why this is definitely going to happen, because we are, as a species, like individually we can, as a species we are incapable of changing. I'm a classicist by training. Like, you read ancient Greek and Latin and it's the same stuff that we're saying now. And so I ended up I writing this story in part because of that, and in part because I just read something about the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, which is a real thing. I feel like I have had to say that more than I ever thought I would, that there is actually a huge patch of garbage, like the size of Texas right now, in the Pacific Ocean. And I kind of combined that with a couple of other things that have been floating around my head to create the story. But really, it's the voice of Tetley, that you just heard, and that flows through the first story, which is included in the volume, and then the much longer continuation of it. And she just kind of arrived in a way that I used to think was weird when writers talked about it like that, as though it wasn't something that you created, but she really did just sort of show up fully formed in my head. And a little while later, Jonathan asked if I was interested in doing a novella in that world. And I kind of had to, I wanted to write more for Tetley. I adore her. She's nothing at all like me. She's so optimistic and so kind. I guess she is kind of like the Ted Lasso of the dystopian future, but she's just a delight to write. But I didn't know if I actually had anything more to say than what I had already said, which is pretty intense about climate change and the nature of dystopia. One of the most important things for me in writing this book was that our civilization not be lionized the way it often is in post-apocalyptic fiction, which is why they call us the fuckwits. That is their official name. Like, children sing a song about it for us, and that there be no way of getting it back. That is the goal of I'd probably, at a conservative number, say 80% of post-apocalyptic fiction at least has some place where people are trying to get to where the old world is still intact. And I wanted to over and over again hit home that that's never happening. There are some things you can't get back. And so I didn't know if I had more to say than that. And ultimately, without spoiling things, what I ended up landing on that I did have more to say about, Jeff Bezos did me a real solid with a publicity boost on the day the book came out, going into space, because that is very much involved with some of the reveals in the book. I'm not really used to being prescient. I have written far more fantasy than science fiction, so it's not really my thing. But it's certainly interesting that it seems to be going that way. And another character named Mr. in the book became the thing that I knew I still had more I wanted to say about how much we truly are fuckwits, and what we are doing to our children and our grandchildren.
How about you, Ben?
So, I don't know about the rest of you, but over the past 4 years, I've felt as though my nerves have kind of short-circuited and burnt out. And I realized that I was losing my capacity for awe, like my sense of wonder. And I think there are a few different reasons for that, Trump being one of them. The pandemic probably had a lot to do with that as well. But I think the glut of information is also just overloading our brains and short-circuiting our systems. And if something happens in the world, in Rio and London and Chicago, wherever, I can learn about it instantly and hear firsthand witness testimony and listen to so-called experts and on and watch surveillance footage and cell phone footage and so on. And as a result of this, I feel like there's almost nothing that we don't know. And part of the challenge here, which is a challenge to myself, was it's in mystery that there's wonder. And so I wanted to create mystery within the world again. And one of, this is an age-old sci-fi premise. A comet comes streaking through the solar system. We spin through the debris field and it introduces new elements that upend the laws of physics and geology and biology, that create chaos in the geopolitical theater, that in a very marvelly sort of way create a new dawn of heroes and villains. And all of these things came together because I wanted to create a new world within this world, a world that, I would find as enchanting as hopefully the reader might. But when it comes to, a few different things informing how the threads of the Ninth Metal came together, one was Minnesota. I've lived here 9 years. I'm from the Pacific Northwest. All of my other books are set there. But having lived in Minnesota for 9 years, I felt like I finally knew the place enough to capture, not just the geography, but the politics, the culture, the history, the myths, the vernacular. And my favorite part of Minnesota is northern Minnesota, which is a kind of liminal zone. If you've been to the Boundary Waters area, there's a lot in the North Shore of Superior. There's a lot of questions about like, what is US? What is Canada? What's tribal? What's private? And I like the idea of these borderlands being a place for a story that was about worlds sort of bleeding into each other in a cosmic sense. And I also was really interested in Minnesota because that North Shore area, the Iron Range, used to be the center of steel for the world. All this iron ore was coming out of there, and they still are producing taconite. But like so many sections of the Midwest, right, economic decline has come. And there are raging debates up there right now, which I follow closely, about whether it's more important to open up mining into, say, the Boundary Waters area, copper nickel mining in particular, or to protect these places. And so with that in mind, I sort of transposed something else that I've been researching carefully, which was the oil boom in North Dakota. Right? The Bakken oil formation has resulted in thousands and thousands of people moving to North Dakota. And I'm talking about people working as roughnecks, truck drivers, mechanics, and everything else, hospitality industry and blah, blah, blah. I'm talking about that, but I'm also talking about rise in prostitution, a rise in drug dealing. There's bodies found in shallow graves. It's become a kind of Deadwood 2.0. And so I thought how interesting it would be if I had this alien metal come down and strike the Iron Range area in northern Minnesota, right? And make essentially the middle of nowhere into the center of everything. That you'd have a similar sort of situation to what was going on in North Dakota, and that there would be this, sort of untrammeled greed going on, and this, this disconnect between the people who had lived there, the people who wanted to preserve, environmentalists who want to preserve this area, and those who were coming in from all over, Saudis and Chinese and Indians and Russians and also energy corporations from Texas and all of them swirling together, trying to buy up mineral rights in and gobble up the land and try to change not just the energy sector, but the weapons industry, because this metal is able to absorb energy on a quantum scale. So it sort of just, with this one trigger event, changes everything. But it also becomes analogous to the world we live in right now, as is the case with so much speculative fiction, right? It's oftentimes sort of a cracked mirror of what we're experiencing.
You
It's
both
fine
are
what you said about is all science fiction, climate fiction. I mean, I do think you have to deal with it if you're going to write anything in the future. Like, I wrote a book called Space Opera, which is a comedy that takes place in the near future. And I'm working on the sequel right now. And I even felt the need to address it in a comedy where no one would care if I didn't address it at all. But I still felt like I had to, because I'm writing something 30 years in the future. It's not even that long in the future, but I felt like it was dishonest, even if I'm mostly cracking jokes in this book, to not include something about it.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about the way that, to address the question further, think about the way that we're so politically, culturally, environmentally, broken right now. Maybe the end of the world has never been more popular in fiction and in all its different mediums, because the end of the world has never seemed more probable. If you're forward thinking, you have to think about the devastation that awaits us, because we're so focused right now on short-term solutions and gains as opposed to the long-term, which is why this is something of a sidebar. I found the first episode of Foundation so interesting. I don't know if anybody else out there has watched it, but the way in which there's sort of like this demand talking about, sci-fi or fantasy or horror being a cracked mirror version of reality. Like, the big question in that story is, like, do we focus on the power of the present, or do we think about the long-term goals of civilization, 1,000 years from now, when generation after generation after generation will be gone? Not just myself, can you have that kind of outward thinking, and can you also have that selflessness?
Along with that, with what you're both saying, the next question I was going to ask is that, as someone who also wrote a kind of dystopian science fiction novel recently, one thing I've kind of been mulling about is just the question of hope in science fiction or speculative fiction. And if we acknowledge that this climate apocalypse is coming, is it still important for us to provide some kind of hope or idea of a path forward in art, or is that not something you're looking to do?
I mean, I genuinely think that's what The Past Is Red is about, at its core. That if literally any of us survive, there is hope. If we are good at anything, humans are good at surviving. We have our evolutionary bottleneck that wasn't even all that long ago, where there were, maybe only 10,000 of us and maybe less. We are good at that. And, when I say we never change, that means our good parts don't change either. And there is some hope in that. And who Tetley is, the narrator of The Past Is Red, and all the completely terrible things that happened to her, and the terrible world that she's a part of, that she never, from the first word to the last word, stopped seeing as the most beautiful place that could ever exist in the history of the world, because it's home. It's still her home. People don't change. You love your home. You see the beauty in your home. Some people do. There's always that one person, in your life that you meet who can't stop being an optimist about things. And there will be people like that when everything has gone to hell too. And in some sense, you can't say that we are not right now living in the world that's gone to hell. We are in the pandemic apocalypse. If it's a cabin in the woods things where you can pick an apocalypse, someone picked a really weird introvert apocalypse, and we ended up with this pandemic. And I think that's why people are talking about it so much now, because we're kind of living through it, and it turned out that humans were worse than we thought. Nobody really thought people were going to screw it up. Even the most pessimistic of us never thought that, the guys who, got bitten by the zombie would not only, say they weren't bitten, but say that zombies don't exist, or that maybe the zombies are good, or that Horse-Faced would keep the zombies off. Like, we just didn't really see the variety of terribleness. We just kind of were blinders on one version of it. But I think that humans can be predicted to be both absolutely the worst and absolutely the best. But the fact that that some of us are going to be the best, like, that's where the hope is, that some of us will always be that person who can help. Like Mr. Rogers said, find the helpers. Like, those people will always exist, and the terrible ones will always exist too. And yep, probably it seems real unlikely that we're not going to end up in some kind of dystopia. We are, like, climate change, it will change. Will we come up with a technology in time that will help us weather that? Who can say? But I think that there is hope. There has to be some kind of hope. As long as any of us survive, in some sense, all of us survive.
Well said. I mean, even the road, which is one of the darkest things you'll ever put in your eyeballs, has that glimmer of hope at the very end, when it looks towards the future and the child is handed off to another family that we hope won't cannibalize him. And after, 4 years of Trump, I was talking with some people about how I really felt like, we were going to enter an era of storytelling that might feel a little like new Capraism, that I think there's going to be, a sort of upswell of shows that are like Ted Lasso.
Yeah.
Right now, a lot of people I know, a lot of people I see online talk about that show in particular as medicinal, which I think is why everybody was so upset about the Coach Beard episode. Don't do that. Right. But, in the Ninth Metal, one of the things that I tried to do was show all sides of this situation, so that I have characters who are, sort of mercenaries. I have characters who are, government operatives looking to take advantage of a situation and weaponize it. I have people who are all out, in the name of greed and ready to sell out or buy out whatever's available in the name of profit. But I also have, like, this one character who's central to the narrative named Stacy Toll, who is a rookie cop and who comes from this town and misses and values what it used to be. And eventually she recognizes that she has to, sort of come to terms with what's happening, like meet things on their own terms. She has to compromise her sort of sunny optimism, like, darken her morals slightly, but she is sort of the messenger of hope that carries through the book. And yeah, I mean, right now, I'm a pretty dark-hearted guy. My blood type is poison, but even I am avoiding, like, things that make me feel awful these days. I'm relying on my, my weekly upload of Ted Lasso to make things a little more buoyant in my heart. So I just expect this trend to continue. I think there'll be some like miserably sentimental, saccharine, knockoffs of Ted Lasso. But I also hope that there'll be, some work out there that feels that expresses sentiment without sentimentality.
So, but back when hardly anyone had seen Ted Lasso, I actually wrote a long essay about why this show was so important and everyone should watch it. You can find it on my Patreon under Cat Valente. And I talked about that, of this trend where, like, comedy stopped being mean and started moving toward being kind. And I think we're seeing this in science fiction too, actually. If you think back to 10 years ago and just the glut of incredibly grim dystopias, like, that was all anybody wanted to publish. It was all anybody wanted to read, was just these teenager, incredibly upsetting dystopias. And it's also kind of like cat memes and dog memes. Like there were no like good boy dog memes until Trump took over. It was all mean cats, and now it's nice dogs. And it's just like we basically nobody can handle how bad the world is. So we need somebody. Somebody needs to tell us it's gonna be okay, because we all still have to go to work tomorrow because capitalism. So please help us go to work tomorrow and give us something nice. And that's part of what Ted Lasso did, and part of why I genuinely do think it's such an important show. And it's part of what you're really seeing with people like Becky Chambers. You know, hope punk is a whole thing in science fiction now, and you're really seeing a change. Like for a long time, science fiction really had a reputation of being as depressing as possible, and as pessimistic an outlook on the future. There were whole movements about like, could we have optimistic science fiction again, like we used to in the 60s? Like, well, you know, you want to charge the rent we paid in the 60s, like we could probably have some more optimistic science fiction, but not so much. But we are getting it. We are like the world got terrible enough that even the most pessimistic people in the world were like, I'm gonna let a ray of sunshine in.
You know, that kind of dovetails into another question I had for you, Catherynne, which is, you know, your book has this great blurb that says that it's the Candide of our string of curse word age. You know, you know, those the symbols in comic books that mean a lot of curse words. And one thing that is really, you know, stands out in the book that is also Candide, like in addition to the kind of optimism that Tetley has, is the humor. And, you know, it's a really rollicking and hilarious and also moving tour of the post-apocalypse. And I guess I was wondering, you know, how you think about humor in your fiction and how it relates to some of these questions.
I mean, it's such an odd turn for my career to have taken, because though I had written like comedic scenes from early on within quite serious books, I've written some dark shit like for a long time. And yet the last couple of books have had this sort of humorous edge to them, and people have really loved it. So now I find myself in my old age a comedian. And I mean, I do love it, and I do love humor. And I think the reason that the past is read and the world that exists in it is remotely tolerable to read, is bearable in any way, is that there is humor, and because of Tetley's optimistic outlook. Otherwise, it's too sad to contemplate. It's just so grim and hopeless, but she has hope within it, and so it is bearable to get through this story. And that's part of what sort of the humor does. But there's also, you know, I mean, Americans don't go in for it a lot, but there is just a gallows humor about living in a shitty society that like most other shitty societies are extremely familiar with. And I really enjoy bringing that into a sort of more modern and youthful voice, rather than sort of the translated Russian jokes of you know, the mid 1930s, which are quite funny but take a lot of work. And so there's a lot of humor in it. I mean, I read you guys a whole passage that basically tries to make participation trophies holy, and there's a lot of that kind of thing in there. And I think you look at things like Canticle for Leibowitz, like taking apart our society and taking contextless pieces of it and making them parts of another culture is sort of the bread and butter of post-apocalyptic fiction. And I wanted to do that in a way that would feel, I don't want to say uplifting, because that's not even it, but that would sort of live between sadness and happiness, in that like the only religion that unites everyone in Garbagetown, because they're from every society on the face of the planet, is that Oscar the Grouch. That's who Saint Oscar is. He's Oscar the Grouch. The book is dedicated to Carol Spinney, who died while I was writing it. Oscar the Grouch is the god of Garbagetown, because of course he is. He is the man who lives in an infinite garbage can. And like even that, it is a peculiar feeling. There's probably only a German word for of something being upsetting but so familiar and dear at the same time. And I think that humor and just that, you know, you all chuckle when I say Oscar the Grouch is God, but like it's actually kind of deep when you think about it, and you think about the situation there, and you think about the world that we live in, where, you know, exist in a world full of wasteful trash, and we generate more of it every single day. Like there is something there that has a lot more heart than just the joke, and I'm always looking for that thing that is a heart full of jokes, I guess. But I think that humor gets us through it still human. It gets us through COVID still human. It gets us through Trump still human. It gets us through all of this while still retaining some part of what makes us sentient.
Nice. If I had a Sesame Street god, I think I would choose Cookie Monster.
I mean, I think Snuffleupagus is obviously Sesame Street's analog for God, but like that's a whole other.
Benjamin, I'd hazard to guess that you're probably the only winner of the Paris Review's Plimpton Prize who has written Green Arrow and Wolverine comics. And as someone who jumps around, between both literary fiction and genre fiction, and also prose fiction and comic books, I was curious how your work at DC and Marvel has changed your novel writing, or if you see that influence going both ways.
Yeah, well, I mean, I have a 4-hour lecture on this exact subject. We'll give you the skinny, quick and dirty version of it. But, I grew up with comics as my definitive reading experience. I can't remember the first novel that I read. I remember reading The Hobbit in 3rd grade. I'm sure there were other books that came before that, but I can remember every comic book that I read. I grew up in a small town outside Eugene, and it was small enough that there wasn't a grocery store, there was a mercantile. And my mom, as she was pushing her cart up and down the aisles, I'd plop down under the spinner rack and I'd just read and read and read. And if I was good, she would let me take one home. And I read those comics over and over and over again. Man-Thing and Warlord and Conan and Thor and the X-Men. And I read them so much that they fell apart in my hands, and I scotch taped them together. And one of the things that I loved about comics was that they're part of a shared universe. What happens in Wonder Woman spills over into Batman, spills over into Superman. And the idea of this ripple effect really compelled me. And I came to sort of recognize after writing for DC and for Marvel that the same sort of thing is happening in literature as well. If you look at the work of Louise Erdrich, if you look at the work of Faulkner, right there, writing their own shared universes. And so one of the things I did with this book, which is the first part of the comic cycle, I'm calling it, is to build my own shared universe. And all of these books happen simultaneously in different parts of the globe, and the characters are bleeding into each other, and they'll eventually intersect and so on, and the Avengers Assemble moment. But when it comes to like the way in which I write, again, there's so much to talk about, but here's a few things. One, a comic book is 20 pages. It's 5 to 7 scenes. There's an A plot, a B plot, a C plot, and a D plot. The B plot of the first issue becomes the A plot of the second issue. The C plot becomes the B plot. There's usually a splash page within the first 5 pages and a splash page in the final page. A splash page being an image that takes up an entire page. What I'm getting at is that comics are very strict in their design. There's a superstructure, right? A formula, you could say. And when Terence Hayes, the poet, is talking about the difference between free verse and form poetry like a villanelle or a sonnet, he says, it's cool if you can break dance, but it's badass if you can break dance in a straitjacket. And writing comics is breakdancing in a straitjacket, and the constraints can be inspiring, and they can also make you that much more efficient as a novelist, and come to recognize the mechanics that are at work in the story that can, carry over to a larger arena. And here's just one other thing that I'll touch on since we don't have much time, but that the villains in comics are almost always, everything's sort of exaggerated, right, compared to standard fiction, more bombastic, more hypercolor. And the villains are almost always an externalization of an internal wound in the hero. Batman's rogues gallery is the greatest of them all, of course. And if we just look at a few of these and the way they work, like Two-Face is if you're writing the story correctly, every Two-Face story should be about the question of whether Bruce Wayne is the man and Batman is the mask, or Batman is the man and Bruce Wayne is the mask, right? Dr. Freeze should be about Bruce's internal coldness. A Joker story is about chaos compared to the core wound of Bruce losing his parents in Crime Alley, which gives rise to the Batman and makes him embrace law and order. A Scarecrow story is about, mastering fear, conquering fear, and then weaponizing it, because Scarecrow had a traumatized childhood in the same way as Bruce, and on and on and on I could go. But there are just two small things that I've learned from comics.
Great. Yeah,
As someone who just wrote Batman, I'm very proud of myself that my villain fits that perfectly.
Well, I have to say, we got through like 4 of my 20 questions, but we've been given the time warning. Maybe I can ask you both real quickly what you're working on next, what's coming out next, and then I'll say goodbye.
What I'm working on right now is the sequel to Space Opera, which is called Space Oddity. Space Opera is, it's not a joke, but it kind of is a Eurovision in space, Hitchhiker's Guide-y kind of thing that ends up being quite political and heartfelt. And I'm working on the sequel. But what's coming out next is Comfort Me with Apples, which is my first murder thriller book. It is speculative. I can't explain how, because there's a huge twist regarding that, and so I have to market this book without telling anyone what it's actually about, but please just read it. It's out November 9th, and that's very cool. And I have a middle grade book called Osmo Unknown and the 8 Penny Woods coming out in April.
Nice. Yeah, I have the sequel to the Ninth Metal coming out in January. It's called The Unfamiliar Garden. Otherwise, I'm writing for Marvel, Wolverine, and X-Force. There's a giant Wolverine event coming out in January that I'm in charge of. Really geeked about that. And I'm writing the adaptation, actually, for Sony. I'm writing the pilot right now for the Ninth Metal, and adapting Urban Cowboy for Paramount Plus. An adaptation of that as a TV show with my buddy James Ponsoldt. So, yeah, juggling chainsaws. What about you, Lincoln? What do you got coming up? What are you working on?
Well, my debut book just came out 2 weeks ago, so I'm still in the promo stage of that, or my debut novel, I should say. I had a story collection before, but thank you both. I guess I got to wrap it up here, but I really enjoyed both of your books. Can't wait for the rest of the comic cycle too. And so thank you both. Thank you, Catherynne Valente and Benjamin Percy. And let's see, I have one thing I have to say here, which is the Brooklyn Book Festival continues this weekend with Children's Day tomorrow and Festival Day on Sunday in downtown Brooklyn, and also virtually. Everyone, please remember you can order books in the link below, and please consider making a donation to the Brooklyn Book Fest, which this year is celebrating its 16th year of presenting free literary programming. And I just want to echo what Benjamin said before, which is thank you all for being here with us on a Friday night.
Absolutely. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Lincoln.
Take care.